I love Italy. I mean, I got to be honest, it's my favorite country. And it's America's favorite country these days in Europe. I mean, it's our best-selling tour, it's our best-selling guidebook. Everybody's crazy about Italy. When I go to Italy, I just see so many people having an incredible time. And I gotta warn you, it's expensive and it's crowded, all right? So that's why I think you're investing a couple of hours now in getting smart about Italy, because the stakes are high. It's the most, I think, challenging country to travel in Europe, and it's also the most rewarding country to travel in. My enthusiasm for Italy is in part based on all the people I meet over there who are using that guidebook and enjoying the best of Italy. Now, when you go to Italy, your challenge is to melt into Italy, not just to go to the famous touristy places and take photographs of all the famous things you've seen, but to just really become part of the scene, to melt in. I mean, imagine one of these persons might be a tourist. Probably not, but but I mean, conceivably you could be there, couldn't you? And that's our challenge. Everybody goes to the same places in Italy. I mean, you know, where are you going to go? Venice, Florence, Rome, Siena, the Cinque Terre, Milan, Lake Como, Amalfi Coast. That's it. And now, I mean, where would I say to go if you had 3 weeks? Venice, Florence, Rome, Siena, Cinque Terre, Milan, Lake Como, Amalfi Coast. So this is something we got to remember when we're traveling, is we're going to the famous places. That's where everybody's going, and that's where it's going to be more crowded and more expensive. We need to be on the ball so we can really enjoy the magic of Italy. And for me, the magic of Italy is also away from the beaten path. I mean, these guys are just in a village that I can't remember the name of in Sicily. I was driving around one day, and I just saw this cheese festival. Now, when you find a cheese festival, you stop. You get out of the car, and you go meet these guys. And they are evangelical about cheese. And you get to meet them. And that's the fun of traveling. You've got to know that Italy has its passions. And when we travel, we'll stumble onto things that aren't in the guidebook. You got to find a way to meet and connect with the local people, and you need to be, the responsibility is yours. If you go to Italy and all you're meeting is people trying to rip you off, well, that's your problem, frankly. I mean, I go to Italy, and I meet people that are fun. They just want to talk and chat, because I'm making the initiative and getting to places where they're not waiting to rip off a tourist, but where they're just enjoying life, and the tourist is welcome, not as part of the economy, but as part of the party. If you see 4 cute guys sitting on a bench, ask them to scoot over. I've been saying that for 25 years, and it works beautifully. Now, this is one of the quintessential experiences when you're in Italy or anywhere in Mediterranean Europe, sitting on the bench with the old guys, watching the world go by. They're there every night. When I drive into these towns year after year doing my research, I know I'm going to see that same guy on the same bench 2 years later. And it's just a beautiful thing. Now, one thing about Italy, of course, is the cuisine. You love the Italian cuisine, and Italians love to cook it and share it. Your challenge is to find restaurants that get a kick out of sharing it instead of get a kick out of ripping you off. There's 2 kinds of restaurants, and you got to get away from the tourist crowds so they're not conditioned to think of us as just naive, rich tourists, but people who they can serve and respect and turn on to their great cuisine. You've got, of course, the most exciting part of Italian cuisine for a lot of people is gelato, a very important word to check out, and there's beautiful gelaterias all over Italy. Italy is intense. It's densely populated, the size of California, with about, what, 65 million people or something, and just as many Fiats and just as many motor scooters, okay? It's noisy, it's congested, it's full of temper tantrums and stray hairs and body odors and people fighting and all sorts of things. And, you know, at the same time, it's a place that is just endearing. But if you will accept it and flow with it, you'll get along with Italy much better. Now, Italy, like the rest of Europe, is dealing with some serious economic realities. And you're going to see a lot of strikes and a lot of strife and a lot of angry people in the streets. I've never been to Italy when there's not a strike, and the strike is designed to frustrate people. And it's designed to be a nuisance. And they say, we're all going on strike Wednesday, and it's just a one-day strike, and all the trains are not going to run. Well, they say all the trains are not going to run, but some trains are going to run, and everybody goes to the station, and you just wait, and sooner or later you get there. A train comes, and you get on anything rolling in that direction during the strike. Right? Just don't tense up if there's a strike, because strikes happen all the time. And I'm not saying they're not going to mess you up, but I'm just saying you need to be thinking 1 or 2 days in advance, talk to local people, and you got to kind of know what your options are and go with the locals. Boy, the Italians have this wonderful love of being out on the streets. And I just really like being out there with them. This is called the passeggiata. In Spain, it's called the paseo, right? And the police literally close down major streets in cities all over Italy. And every evening, people are out arm in arm or strolling or on the prowl or making the scene. Or it's like cruising without cars. I can't stay in the hotel when it's happening. I'm out and it seems like, what's the holiday? The holiday is 6 o'clock. That's what it is. Let's get out and stroll. Now, Italy, what a history, what a story, and I mean, we think of Rome. Rome goes 1,000 years, from 500 BC to 500 AD. It grows for 500 years, it peaks for 200 years, and it falls for 300 years. The first half is the relatively idealistic, ruled by the aristocracy and so on, called the Republic, and the last half is the iron-fisted dictatorship, the empire. It got so big you just needed a no-nonsense, cut out all the nicey stuff. We're going to have an empire because we got this huge empire to run. When Rome reached its biggest expanse, at the time of Christ, that was the beginning of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It's like, now we've conquered everybody, they're under our foot, now we can have peace. Aren't we nice? You see, that was the whole concept of this Pax Romana. When Rome got that big, the word Rome no longer meant the city, but it meant the entire civilized world. Everybody who spoke Greek and Latin was Roman, part of the empire. Everybody else outside of the walls of the empire was barbarian. They didn't even speak the classic languages. Then, of course, we have 1,000 years of darkness, and then Italy was sitting on the rubble of the greatness of classical Rome, and they knew they were in a middle time, and in 1400 you had that wonderful Renaissance, the rebirth of the cultural greatness of the classical age. And it happened in Italy, specifically Florence, because it was the most urban part of Europe, the most wealthy part of Europe, the most literate part of Europe, the place with the first banking system, sitting on the rubble of ancient Rome, and you had a very big civic spirit where there was a competition between towns and a lot of very talented people that did great things for the greatness of their town out of that kind of spirit. So there we have the birthplace of the Renaissance, and from that we've got the art that we know so well, Michelangelo, Leonardo, and Raphael, and so on. When we think about the Renaissance, most of us tourists just think about paintings and statues. But there's much, much, much more to the Renaissance than we realize. Even planning of entire cities in a Renaissance way, like this Italian town north of Venice called Palmanova. So remember, the Renaissance is more than just the visual arts. When you go to Italy, I want to warn you, there's thieves. If there's 2 thieves in town, you're going to meet them. Right? That's just the reality. And I think Italy is about the worst place. Well, no, Italy is among the worst places in Europe for petty pickpocketing and purse snatching. If you have valuables in your purse or your wallet, you're part of the problem. That's why they target us. Wear the money belt. You don't put it in your purse. Your purse is the most likely thing to get ripped off. It's much safer in your hotel room than with you out on the streets of Rome. You're going to meet the thieves in Europe. Hands out, they say, euro, euro. They really want your wallet. They're not beggars, they're pickpockets. That's what you got to know. Here's a tour group. Their guide just gave them a tour. The guide's off on her own, and now the group's on their own. This lady was waiting until the guide stopped talking, and she walks right into the spot where the tour guide was, stick out her hands. We are targeted by the thieves in Europe. Wear that money belt. And remember, when there's crowds, there's people getting their pockets picked, and they don't necessarily look like gypsies. They look like tourists, they look like priests, they look like professional business people. That's what a good thief is going to do. Go where it's really crowded and dress up in what you would least expect to be a pickpocket. And there's where they get you, okay? Just be on the ball whenever there's a crowd, whenever there's a commotion. If you're out on the streets, there's pickpockets at work. I don't want you to be paranoid. I'm not paranoid, I'm just not vulnerable. And I know if there's a commotion, I get out of the way. We need to take the public transit. I mean, that's what local people take. Not everybody can hop into a taxi. It's expensive to take the taxi. It costs $60 to take the taxi in from the airport in Rome. It costs $15 to take the shuttle train. Shuttle train goes 4 times an hour. It takes 12 minutes. I mean, it's hard to complain about that. And if you're complaining about the price of a taxi, you're not really trying to travel cheap, are you? So if you are on a budget, just travel smart. There are ways that normal working class people are traveling, and it's ordering lower on the menu, it's using public transit. You can hop on the bus for $1 in Rome and get there just like that, if you know how to use the bus. When you go on the public transit, you got to remember you get a ticket, but the ticket is not validated until you punch it into a little clock box. If you have your ticket and you bought it because you're an honest traveler and you get on the bus and you just sit there and the plainclothes officer checks you, which is going to happen about every once in a while, you know, if you haven't validated your ticket, he thinks you're ripping off the system and he's going to fine you $100. It happens all the time. They don't cut a tourist a bit of slack. It is your responsibility to validate your ticket when you get onto a train or a bus or a subway. The train system in Italy is remarkably good and inexpensive. And you can function on the trains very well. There's two kinds of schedules, trains departing and trains arriving. And you've always got several different categories. This is the same in the United States or Germany or Portugal or Italy. The destinazione, the category, the time it leaves, if it's late, ritardo, and binario, which is the track, all right? So you can see no trains are late. These trains are designed to go at these times from these tracks to those destinations, and this is what a lot of people forget to look at. Here we have the official time right now. It's 2:51. And this is the official listing of where are their trains still in and where are the trains gone. Now this says it's not late, this train to Nettuno, but it was supposed to be gone 6 minutes ago and it's still on track 14. Do you follow me? So when you come into the station, the first thing I do is I look up here and I see what time is it now and who's leaving in the next couple of minutes. It's quite a challenge. And a lot of people screw up and a lot of locals screw up. It's not foolproof. But if you apply yourself and try to figure out the train system, it becomes your servant and you get around Italy really, really well. I like to use the trains and the buses in Italy more than driving in Italy, especially in the big cities. Cars are worthless, expensive headaches in the big cities. You don't even want a car. If I was going to Venice, Florence, Rome, and Naples, and Milan, and somebody said you can have a car for free, I'd say no thank you. Get it out of I don't want it. A car is a worthless, expensive headache in the big cities. You want to go by train from center to center without worrying about where do I park this thing? And will it still be there tomorrow when I want to drive away? The last thing you're going to do is use a car to get around a city. You don't do it. Okay. Now, if you're going to be tooling around the countryside and checking out the hill towns of Tuscany or the Dolomite or the lakes of northern Italy, then conceivably you might have a car. Italy is well enough organized and is small enough where I would say do it in two overlays. First you do the without the car, then you pick up your car and you do it with the car, even if it means backtracking a little bit. You get on that freeway and in 5 hours you've corrected everything in the country by just going on the auto route. The auto route is like the Autobahn, except it comes with toll booths. Autostrada, I guess is the Italian word, yeah. In Italy, every half an hour, you got to stop and stick in some money here. It's about, I'd say it's $10 an hour. Okay, here's what we're going to cover in this rundown on Italy now. We're flying into Milan, and this is what I think is the best 3-week trip around Italy. This is what I would recommend doing. You'd fly into Milan, and you'd go straight from Milan to the Lake District, Varenna. That's my favorite town on the Italian lakes, Lake Como. You could side trip from there to check out Milan, a great city. That's the no-nonsense business capital of Italy. Then you'd go over to the Alpi di Susi, the highest alpine meadow in the Dolomites. That's the Italian Alps. Down to Venice, from there 3 hours south to Florence, over to the Cinque Terre to hang out on the beaches, check out Pisa on the way to Siena, Orvieto and Civita, a little hill town country in Tuscany and Umbria, and then bypassing Rome to Naples and Sorrento. Actually, you make Sorrento your home base because Naples is a little gritty for most people's taste, and you can side trip up to Naples from Sorrento and have your urban jungle day, and then from this base in Sorrento, you enjoy the Amalfi Coast, perhaps a look at Paestum, the great Greek ruins there, a side trip to Pompeii, you go out to Capri. You could spend 4 nights and keep very busy just with Sorrento as your base, and then you go back to Rome to fly home. That is a great 3-week look at Italy, or if you had a month, that would be a beautiful month. We're going to start in the Cinque Terre. Oh, I love the Italian Riviera, the Cinque Terre, and you got 5 towns like this, and another one around the corner, connected by vineyards and trails and boats in the most rugged part of the Italian coastline, put there by locals 1,000 years ago, hiding out from pirates. When you go to the Cinque Terre today, you'll find these tangly little towns like this, each with a castle, honeycombed with funky little homes that are now renting out to travelers. It used to be untouristy, now it's very touristy, but it's still great. I can hardly wait to get back there. Everybody loves the Cinque Terre. Every time I go, I wonder, is it too touristy? I go there, all the tourists are having a blast, all the locals just love all the money they get, and a few disgruntled people wonder why I just didn't keep it a secret and tell them. All right, so all of us are going to the Cinque Terre now, and it is a wonderful, delightful chance to enjoy the Italian Riviera. Thankfully, the government preserves these buildings so nobody can develop them. There's no modern buildings in these towns, therefore there are no comfortable hotels. Which is actually good because it keeps away the most obnoxious slice of the traveling public, people who need comfortable hotels. What you want to do is go there and find the funky little B&Bs and the guest houses and the small hotels. And there's plenty of those. This is Vernazza. This is my favorite of the 5 towns. Just a delightful, laid-back Italian Riviera wonderland. There's one town in the Cinque Terre that is somewhat of a resort. It's Monterosso al Mare. Where you can rent an umbrella and so on. But most of the towns are funky little beaches, local people hanging out, and hard-working entrepreneurs renting out extra rooms to the many travelers that come that way. Lots of interesting characters, sort of eccentric people that rent out funky cheap rooms. You can stay quite reasonably considering how beautiful the situation is, and remember, good hikes from town to town. This is called the Via dell'Amore, the walkway of love, connecting 2 of the towns. This is looking in from the breakwater at Vernazza in the evening. Wonderful food. I mean, this is the birthplace of pesto, and wonderful pasta designed for pesto, local white wine, just a beautiful opportunity to enjoy Italian nature, Italian cuisine, and of course Mediterranean sunshine. There are congested resorts nearby that have high prices and lots of traffic, and I just don't like any of the Riviera towns that have traffic. I like Italy without traffic. Fiat-free Italy is my favorite. When I think of my favorite places, the Cinque Terre, Siena, Venice, San Gimignano, and so on, most of these places are essentially traffic-free. That's why I like them. Okay, going north, you find a bunch of lakes up where Italy is sort of welded to the Alps. And each lake has its own personality. Lago di Garda is a resort, popular with Germans for windsurfing, and so on. My favorite lake of all of them is called Lago di Como, Lake Como. And this is clearly the place that you get this wistful 19th century aristocratic elegance, old villas, wonderful resort, old-fashioned resort towns like Bellagio. Many people know it from another Bellagio, I think. But this Bellagio in the Lake Como is just dramatic and charming as can be, but quite ritzy. I like staying at the little sister of Bellagio, a 10-minute ferry ride away, called Varenna. This is my favorite freshwater Cinque Terre sort of town. The ferries come every hour or 2, and they zip you around the lake. This can be your home, and the great thing about Varenna is it's just 1 hour away from Milano by train. So you fly into Milan, get on that train, and your first night is in a charming small town with no traffic on a lake. This is honeymoon country, luna di mille, they say, honeymoon. And when you go there, you just find all sorts of people enjoying a wonderful romantic break on the lake. Charming old-time steamers, paddle boats taking you from town to town. This is Bellagio across the way with nicer hotels and fancier restaurants and people walking their poodles. And then further to the east, you get the Italian Alpine, the Dolomites. This is Alberto Tomba country, and here we have my favorite part of the Dolomites. I drove all over the place for my guidebook to try to find what I think is the best little chunk of the Alps to enjoy. The Alpi di Susi feels just charming as can be. This is the high meadow, alpine meadow. You can have beautiful, easy walks along here, or you can hike for a more demanding walk to the top of the Schlern. Now this is called the South Tyrol, or the Alto Adige. Remember, the Dolomite used to be part of Austria. Austria started and lost World War I, then you lose some of your international holdings. And Italy was given the Austrian part of the southern part of Austria. And the Austrians called it the South Tyrol in German. The Italians called it the Upper Adige in Italian, Adige being the river there, the Upper Adige Valley. When you come in, you find that it's actually trilingual. You've got people speaking ancient Latin type language, you've got people speaking German, and people speaking Italian. I think German would be the first language in a lot of those villages up there. And they are, the Italian government is doing a lot to placate the German-speaking people that wish they were still with Austria. So there's a lot of tax benefits and so on. And you go up there and you find this interesting mix of Italian and German culture. Of course, there's great ski resorts in the summer or in the winter, and in the summer you go to those same places and it has this sort of beach ambiance, you know, petting zoos, lounge chairs, people enjoying just some sun tanning between their hikes. You can ride a ski lift up and then hike around the mountain and come down, and there's shuttle buses and everything in this traffic-free national park, the Alpi di Susi. My favorite home base in the region is called Castle Roto, or Castle Ruth. You see, there's two names for the towns because some of it is German and some of it is Italian. It's the same town. And it's Castle Ruth or Castle Roto. When I go to Castle Roto, I'm always impressed by all of the local culture. Every time I've been there, there's something very characteristic going on, and it's not for tourists. It's for the locals. Nearby is Bolzano. That's the big town of the region, Bolzano, and it's famous, most famous. It's a wonderful town. It feels like a Tyrolean town, kind of like Innsbruck or something. It's most famous for Ötzi the Iceman, and they chipped him out of a glacier, and he's a couple thousand years old, and he doesn't look a day over 800, you know, I mean, it's amazing. He's, this is just a mannequin to show some of his fashion, but you can actually see his stitched leather gear, and the man himself is in a refrigerator with a see-through door, and you can see him there. It's just quite an amazing sight when you go to Bolzano. Farther north is my favorite castle interior, perhaps in all of Europe. This is the Reifenstein Castle. Now, this is the most important trade route over the Alps, all the way back to Roman times. And it just makes sense there'd be a lot of castles along here to bottle up trade. This one is still lived in by the noble family, and the woman of the house lets tourists come in 3 times a day, and she or her aide will give you guided walks through the castle. That's Reifenstein Castle. An exciting way to cross the border is to go to the French resort in the Alps called Chamonix. Enjoy Chamonix, great hikes, great mountains, and great lifts, and so on. And then you ride the lift up to 12,600 feet. That's the Aiguille du Midi. And then, instead of going back down into France, you cross over into Italy. For 40 minutes, you and your travel partner are in this little gondola for 2 with your head hanging out the window, just surveying this incredible, what they call sea of ice. As you glide silently dangling over the glacier, you cross into Italy at 11,000 feet, a place called Hellbrunner Point. You drop into Italy, and this is your first look at that country. Great way to introduce yourself to Italy. As you go down that valley, you'll find what's called the Rome of the North, a town called Aosta, A-O-S-T-A, in the valley of Aosta. But I personally would make a beeline for Milano. I think Milano is underrated, and if you got a 3-week look at Italy, you really owe it to yourself to spend a couple nights and a day in Milano. They say for every church in Rome, there's a bank in Milano. It's a no-nonsense business capital, but it's a big cultural and historic capital all the way back to early Christian times, just after the fall of the Roman Empire. Very important things going on in there in the 5th and 6th century. Leonardo lived there during the Renaissance for good reason. And in Milano, you can also find lots going on in modern history. I love Milano because we owe it to ourselves to get a little honest look at what makes these countries really powerful these days. And Italy has just recently surpassed Britain in per capita income. And it's not because of Venice and Siena and the Cinque Terre, I can promise you that. It's because of no-nonsense cities like Genoa, Torino, and Milano. Of those, Milano is the best to see. When you go to Milano, the striking centerpiece is this flamboyant Gothic cathedral, the Duomo. Duomo is the Italian word for cathedral. And when you go to Milan, this is the centerpiece. It's flamboyant Gothic. That's the last in the evolution of Gothic architecture. It starts out stately and clean with all the architectural lines, and then it gets more and more ornate until finally you get to this overripe stage just before Gothic collapses and the next stage, Renaissance, takes on. So this is the very end of the Gothic movement, flamboyant Gothic, and it's just littered with all of these spires upon spires, and you can actually go up to the top and hang out on the roof for a little sun tanning right in the center of the town. A fun thing to do as you're exploring this great city. Across the street from the Duomo, you've got one of the first great shopping galleries in Europe, built in the 1870s to celebrate the unification of Italy. Italy was united in 1870, and there's a lot going on then to celebrate the unification of Italy. New trains, great malls, finished churches, and so on. This modern shopping mall, as state-of-the-art back in 1870, is well worth checking out when you're in Milano. Of course, in Milan, people are going to want to see The Last Supper by Leonardo, and I'm warning you, it needs a reservation. Many of the most important sites in Europe these days require reservations, not just advised reservations. You can't get in without a reservation. And in the case of The Last Supper, the idea is it's so fragile, they don't want heavy-breathing tourists to take flashes and change the humidity and so on, so they limit it. And every I forget exactly, but something like every 45 minutes, 30 people can go in. and you got to spend 10 or 15 minutes in this dehumidification room before you're allowed into the climate-controlled, beautiful room where you've got Leonardo's fragile masterpiece, The Last Supper. So you need to make a reservation in advance. I used to say a week in advance is fine, but with the whole Da Vinci Code phenomenon, now you got to make a reservation a couple months in advance to see Leonardo's Last Supper. It's not that tough, but you just got to be an on-the-ball traveler. Use your guidebook. It says exactly how to do it. It's simple. Okay, but you got to do it or you're going to be frustrated. Anybody can see Michelangelo's Last Pieta when they're in Milan. It's free and it's in the Fortezza. Interesting to check out some of the less known statues by Michelangelo. If you're on the ball, you can see most of Michelangelo's finished work either in Rome or Florence or Milano. If you're interested in the unification movement of Italy or the Mussolini age of Italy, you can find, and World War II experience, you can find great museums for those topics in Milan, probably better than in other cities. 3 hours away by train, you get to Venice. I absolutely love Venice. Venice is the best preserved city in Europe, period. Now remember the story. Venice started back in the Dark Ages. When Rome fell, all the barbarians were free to run around, and there was, you know, bully groups and there was like timid groups. And the bullies would trample through the farmers of the pushovers there in the little villages. And finally these people, these peace-loving, meek, mild people on the mainland of Venice, Veneto, got together after being trampled by the barbarians, and they said, you know, this is going to be miserable, but let's move out into the lagoon and hope the barbarians don't like water. So they abandoned their farms, they went out into the lagoon, they literally deforested that part of Venice or Italy to get trees to pound into the mud to give them foundations. They became fishermen and later traders, and they established Venice, never bothered by the barbarians, and it became the most powerful economic center of Europe, and by the year 1000 it was the economic power, with the trading empire stretching all the way to the Holy Land. Incredible, the power of Venice. And when we go there today, we find a perfectly preserved island city that we can explore. Now, when you want to understand the military might of Venice, remember they had Europe's first military industrial kind of big machine. They could crank out one warship a day with an early form of mass production, assembly line production at their arsenal. And the story is when any nation, any country or king or whatever might want to challenge Venice, Venice would invite him down and say, come on down next week, we want to show you how we make a warship. And they would just show, and the guy would look at Venice turning out, they could say they could build and outfit a warship in a single day. And the guy went home and said, let's not mess with Venice. You know, that was their deterrent. And it really is quite an impressive thing, and you can still see the outside of the arsenal today. When you go to the main square, you get a sense, when you look at it today, it looks just like it did back in its heyday. Of course, the centerpiece is the Basilica of St. Mark. Here you have the bell tower, and surrounded by all the city offices. From the top of that bell tower, you get a beautiful view of the city, and you'll notice there are no modern buildings in the town. This is the Grand Boulevard, the main street of Venice, called the Canale Grande, the Grand Canal, and these are city buses. You see, there's private boats, there's taxis, and there's city buses. And it's just like, it works just like normal buses, but you know, they've got numbers, they've got numbered stops. I guess the only difference is if you get off between stops, you can drown. It cost about $5 to ride the gondola. And I thought, $5? And then I went down to San Francisco and it cost $5 to ride the trolley. It's just, it's expensive, you know, you hop on that thing, it's gonna be $5, but it's really a treat, and you'll take that anywhere you want to go in town. Remember, Venice is packed out with tourists. It's a small town of 50 or 60,000 people, inundated with far more than that each day. And at night, the tourists go away and the local people retake their town. It's really quite a scene when you're in Venice. In the morning, you see it, rush hour, everybody flooding into the town, overwhelming the town with tourists just prowling. And at night, they're all heading back out. All the boats going this way are packed. All the boats coming into town are empty. Spend the night in the city. It's very important. Stay in the town. Spend more than you need to stay in a hotel right downtown so you can be out late and out early without all the tourist crowds. Be careful you don't just get mesmerized as the typical tourist does, walking in a trance through all this trashy little beads. It's just like, I mean, it's just insulting to the tourists that have one day in Venice and they end up kind of strolling back and forth on the same shopping drag between the Rialto Bridge and the Doge's Palace. And they're just comparison shopping for this trash. And they're missing all sorts of art wonders and cultural wonders and great experiences. You need to break away from that. One of the challenges for me in my guidebook is to find restaurants that are a good value. I don't say non-touristy restaurants because you can't have a restaurant and be non-touristy in Venice. Every restaurant is touristy, but you can find some restaurants that give you respect, decent food in a beautiful setting, and other restaurants that are going to be more disappointing. I've found some beautiful places on canals that give you great experiences when you want to have your, your romantic Venetian evening dining out. You'll hear a lot of people complaining about a $10 cup of coffee in Venice or a $20 beer. What they're talking about is on St. Mark's Square. You're renting a piece of the most expensive real estate in Europe for as long as you'd like to sit there, and you got an orchestra performing for you, and it comes with a drink. You're not getting a $10 cup of coffee. You're getting a $2 cup of coffee, and you're paying $8 for the orchestra and the view. So don't tell me a coffee costs $10 in Venice, because those are not good travelers. You could go into that same place, step up to the bar inside, and get a coffee for $2, all right? So remember, when you go to Europe, you want to pay too much for a cup of coffee if you're going to sit and enjoy the view. That's a quintessential European thing to do, and I love to spend $5 for a cup of coffee if I'm going to relax for half an hour and watch the scene. Remember, spend the night in Venice, be out late, be out early. That's when the city is all yours. Venice is shaped like a fish. Notice that. And until the last century or whatever, it was an island, and now they brought in the causeway. And the causeway is a freeway and a train line that brings everything into the town. All the people, all the goods, and so on, coming into the town. Now, this is that shopping street right here that I was talking about. From the Rialto Bridge to the Doge's Palace. Back and forth people go. It is your responsibility to get over here, get up there, get over here, get out there, and see the town. 90% of the tourists are right here, complaining about the crowds and the high cost. This is the Rialto Bridge, lined with tourists. Beautiful place to be. Great meeting spot right there. I'll see you at the top of the Rialto. This is the city bus, the Vaporetto. All right. Here we have the Doge's Palace. That's the most important piece of political real estate in Europe for centuries, really. That was it, the Doge's Palace. You can go to the top of that bell tower for a good view. Remember, Venice used to be, the patron saint used to be Theodore and the Dragon. But Venice needed to have a relic. It didn't have any great relics. By the year 1000 or 800 or something, it was a political power. It was plenty wealthy, but nothing on the pilgrimage map. And in the Middle Ages, you had to be on the pilgrimage map. Nobody's going to come and visit you unless you have some relics. So they had to figure that one out. St. Mark's Basilica is called St. Mark's Basilica because it holds the bones of St. Mark. All right? And they needed to get that to be on the pilgrimage map. They sent, I don't know if they were flyers or newsletters or whatever, but it was they were aware that the bones of St. Mark were available in Egypt. And they sent down a crew to what they call rescue the bones of St. Mark. And they took those bones, those precious bones, and they hid them, and they took them in a boat back to Venice. And here you have a mosaic that's about 1,000 years old that shows the story. Here's St. Mark himself, kind of grumpy after the long voyage, being taken into the church. They plant him in the church under the altar. St. Theodore and the Dragon are gone. St. Mark and the Winged Lion are in, and bam, Venice is on the pilgrimage map. Now you got yourself a decent city. Great political town, great economic power, and a great pilgrimage destination. It's a fascinating story and well worth understanding when you go there. And then, of course, you can step in and you understand why this beautiful, gilded church interior is so lavish, because it holds the bones of the great evangelist St. Mark. Now, here we got the famous horses of St. Mark's. These are copies today, and the originals are kept inside out of the acidic air. When you are in Venice, one of the big deals is to see glass blowing. And many people go to the island of Murano for the glass blowing. It's quite a touristy thing, and it's interesting to see them making the glass. I'll tell you, you can see the same show right off St. Mark's Square if you know where to go. And tour groups go there all the time. I explain in the book how individuals can just hop into one of the groups, go up, and see the glass horse being made, and then endure the funny sales pitch afterward, and check out all the goods. One of my favorite themes these days for art appreciation is called art in situ, in the position the artist intended it. Now, you can go to Venice or museums anywhere in Italy and Europe and see lots of art hanging on museum walls, and that's fine. But to see the work of the great masters where they designed it to be, to me, that's better. I'd rather see one great Titian and one great Bellini side by side in two chapels than to go to the museum and see them hanging on the wall where the artist never knew. The best opportunity for that is in a church called the Chiesa di Frari, the Church of the Brothers. And I just love this church, and you'll see, for instance, a great painting by Titian. Now, one of the ways that you're going to really get romantic about Venice is to take the gondola ride. And it's kind of a racket. It costs about $100 for a 40-minute paddle on these things. You can divide the cost and the romance by up to 6 people, all right? It's a real touristy thing to do, but I gotta say, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and people just love it. And you're sort of living with this guy for 45 minutes or so. He can be a jerk, or he can be a beautiful, charming person. It behooves you to talk to a few gondoliers before you commit yourself to the ride, to make sure you get a guy who you just enjoy, speaks a little English, can give you a nice time, and then they'll cruise you around. Or if you're on a budget, you can just stand on a bridge like I do and just wave at people who are cruising under there. But what can you say about going on a gondola with your favorite travel partner under the bridge of sighs? It's a beautiful thing. Now, if you're on a tight budget, you can also remember that gondolas serve as, shuttles where there are no bridges. And they go back and forth all day long. They're called traghetti. And locals know about this, most tourists don't, but you put 50 cents on the deck and you stand in there and they take you across where there's no bridge. There's 6 or 7 of these along the Grand Canal. And I just feel very savvy when I jump onto there and I use it. And you can go back and forth several times and just spend a couple dollars and call it a gondola ride, okay? The best way to enjoy the town is simply to get out and walk. Now, a lot of people are nervous about getting lost. Don't worry about getting lost. Get as lost as you can. Wander to the far reaches of that island and keep telling yourself, I'm on an island and I can't get off, right? I'm on an island and I can't get off. And remember, I walk my groups all over creation. I wonder, does he know where he is? How is he? And then I find my way back. How do I do that? I just look above the crowds. On the corner of the building, you have signs indicating where the nearest landmarks are. You don't use streets. There's no street names. They just go by that way or that way to the bridge, that way to the church or whatever. You look above the crowds here and you see St. Mark. Either direction. But you walk to the far reaches of that island and you find yourself enjoying quiet little magical spots like this. And I want to remind you, when you get completely entirely lost, drop into any restaurant or hotel. They love to give out their cards, and every business in Venice has a map on the back of the card, locating where you are and how you get there. That also tells you how you get out of there, right? So with that card, you can find out how to get back to the main square and you're on your way. Remember, Venice started so long ago, 1,600 years ago, as a refugee camp out there in the lagoon. And if you cruise around the lagoon a little bit, you can find some mud flats that kind of evoke the beginnings of Venice. And the oldest buildings you'll find in Venice are on the island of Torcello. Torcello was devastated by mosquitoes, I believe, and today just a few farms and the original church. But that's the oldest church in Venice. And I'm standing on the bell tower to get this great view. And that's quite a nice side trip from Venice to go out to Torcello. When you have the perfect storm of barometric pressure, a wind, and a high tide, you get a flood. And it happens a lot in the winter. It happens a lot all the time these days. And it's kind of fun when you're in Venice. And the lowest part in town is St. Mark's Square. Here we have St. Mark's Square, and this is where the water starts. And slowly, when you see that, you know you're in for a flood, and pretty soon people are going to be putting their feet up on the next chair. And then pretty soon it's like this. And locals pull on their boots. Other people have to use the elevated sidewalks. And I tell you, if you think it's crowded without a flood, when there's a flood, it's a complete standstill on a traffic jam. It's a human traffic jam. It's horrible to get anything done when there's a flood. So floods are fun, but it messes up your sightseeing. Venice has the Carnival. My son was just there this Carnival a couple weeks ago, and it's quite commercialized these days, and most people just say it's a sad, sorry shadow of what it used to be. I've not been there during Carnival, but I've never heard people say it's magical or worth the trouble. It's quite commercialized in Venice these days. I find my Carnival magic any night. Late at night when all the tourists are gone, I just wander the town. You've got wonderful dueling orchestras on the main square, and for me, the real charm is to go to the back streets and have a mobile dinner. I call it the Progressive Venetian Stand-Up Pub Crawl. I eat ugly things on toothpicks and wash it down with local white wine. And it doesn't cost much. I'm hanging out with local characters and I'm enjoying the local cuisine. When you go to these ciccheto bars, cicchetti is the local word for tapas, you see. It's a uniquely Venetian thing, the cicchetti. And they've got them all listed here, and you point to what you like and he dishes you up, and you hang out with these guys. So there's your characteristic pub crawl dinner when you're in Venice. And in our book we have, if you want to follow the, connect the dots kind of thing, we propose a good ciccheto crawl. From Venice, you got a number of great stops nearby. Just half an hour away is Padova. Padova is famous for St. Anthony, and here's his great church. And also, Padova is famous for its university. It's got one of the most historic universities in all of Europe. And I find it interesting because people are always graduating, depending on when they do their doctorate or their thesis or they defend their paper or whatever it is. So you always find kids roasting their friends to celebrate their graduation. You know, they have the elegant with grandma all dressed up, and then they dress down, and they make the person wear something very humiliating. Half an hour away from there, you've got Verona, and this is the town of Romeo and Juliet. It's more important than that. It's the town of great Roman ruins and the best evening strolling night scene I can find in Italy. I love Verona for many reasons. Of course, people on the tours go there to see the fake balcony of Juliet. Clearly has nothing to do with Juliet, but everybody goes there. It's the most crowded square I've ever seen, I think, in Italy. And you got all sorts of people rubbing Juliet's breast to give them a good love life and writing their name on the wall and everything. Okay, I think what you want to do from there is head south for a couple hours in the train and you get to Florence. Florence, of course, is the epicenter of the Renaissance. That's that cultural explosion that finally brought Europe out of the Dark Ages. It happened right here, as I mentioned, because Florence was the most educated and the most prosperous and the most urban part of Europe. This part of Europe right here, it had the first banking systems. It was sitting on the rubble of Rome. It knew what it was all about. And even in the darkest depths of the Middle Ages, people there referred to themselves as in a middle time. They knew it was great. They knew they're in the doldrums culturally, and they knew they were going to get it together. And in 1400 they did. And when you go to the top of this dome, you can look out and see the wonders of the Renaissance. All of the great Florentine art, or most of it, it seems like it's a 15-minute walk from the top of that dome. When Brunelleschi built this dome, or when Michelangelo built his dome in Rome at St. Peter's, he said, I can build a dome bigger but not more beautiful than the dome in my hometown by Brunelleschi. This is the pride and joy of the Florentines, and this is the dome that kicked off the architectural Renaissance. The domes after that were inspired by this one. This was a Gothic church. They left the whole incomplete. They didn't want to build another spire, and Brunelleschi figured it out, and he was able to cap it with this dome. You can go to the top of that dome, or you can go to the top of the bell tower for a nice view of downtown Florence. Here's from the top of the dome. You can see the straight streets, reminding you that this was a Roman garrison town originally. And here we have the Medici Palace. Connecting to that is the Uffizi. That's the Italian word for offices. That's the greatest collection of Italian paintings anywhere. And the Bargello is the best collection of Italian statuary. So here you got a lot of art very close together. From the Uffizi, you can cross the Arno River. This is the old bridge, the Ponte Vecchio. And on the other side of the river, you got the Ultra Arno. Or in Rome, the other side of the river is called the Trastevere. On the other side of the river, we have the wrong side of the tracks. In Italy, it seems like they have the wrong side of the river. The colorful stuff is Ultra Arno Trastevere. When I am encountering a big city, I like to think of it as a medieval town, and I look on the road plan and I can see what was the medieval walls that have now been torn down and make a circle coming out from the river, which was always the location of the town. That is the way I cannot be overwhelmed by the town's sprawl, and I know what to focus on. When you think of it, within the medieval walls, all of the important historical sites are right in here. It becomes quite easy to manage. Remember, in Florence, that's where we have the merger of art and science. Now we have artists employing mathematical laws of perspective to give you a believable three-dimensional scene on a flat two-dimensional surface. And that's sort of one of the big initiatives of the Renaissance. And in Florence, they mobilized this civic pride. They would have all the artists competing to see who could do the gates of the paradise, the gates of the baptistry, nicknamed the Gates of Paradise because they're so beautiful. And Ghiberti won the prize, and he did these great panels. And I think when you go to Florence, you need to understand a little bit about the basis of the Renaissance, because here you have an opportunity to see what a dramatic difference it is from the Gothic art that preceded that. And in Florence, you've got a lot of great Gothic art that you can see in situ, and then across the street, you've got the great Renaissance art. If you know where to look, you can find wonderful Michelangelo statues. Remember, in the Museum of the Cathedral, the Museo del Duomo, that's the most underrated museum in Florence, considering how great it is. That's the museum you never have to wait in line, and that's where you can see Michelangelo's great, one of Michelangelo's incredible Pietas, all right? Don't miss the Museum of the Duomo, the Museum of the Cathedral. I mentioned the Medici Palace, the Uffizi Galleries. There's a sky bridge connecting them. David originally went right here. This is a model today, and the original one is nearby in a beautiful neoclassical setting, or a Renaissance sort of dome. You've got an open-air gallery of great art here on the main square in Florence. When you go into the Uffizi Gallery, you're going to find the greatest paintings of the Italian Renaissance. It is a sumptuous collection, and I just want to remind you, it's very important to have information for that. We've put it together on our audio tour. If you don't use the audio tour, you got it in the guidebook, but one way or another you need help to sort through all that great art, because otherwise you won't enjoy I don't think you'll enjoy Botticelli as much as you might. Every time I go to the Uffizi Gallery, there's a long, long line, 300 yards long line, of hot, sweaty, bored, frustrated tourists, sort of angry at the long line. Well, they didn't read their guidebook. All you got to do is call a few days in advance and make an appointment. And it's simple. I was just there and did it, using my guidebook. I mean, you just call up, you tell them, hi, I'm Rick Steves, or I'm whoever. I want to come to the museum on Wednesday at 2 o'clock. And they'll tell you, well, it's full at 2, can you come at 3? Yes, great. Okay, here's your confirmation number. You show up at 3 o'clock, you walk by all of these people, trying not to be too smart aleck, and you go to the front, you tell them your name, you show them your number, you're in, you've enjoyed the place, and you're out before that last person got to the front of the line. It's very important. There's 2 IQs of European travelers, those who wait in lines and those who don't wait in lines. If you're waiting in line, you're messing up. Your trip is too important to do that. All over Florence, there are wonderful churches that have great art in the churches if you know where to look. It's inexpensive, it's never crowded. This is the great Trinity by Masaccio. Many people just choose to comparison shop for little plaster Davids. It's fun to do your shopping in Florence, but don't get sidetracked and miss the actual biggies. David. What a celebration of humanism. Doesn't it just look like a church to man's greatness? That's sort of humanism was what the Renaissance was all about. We have man stepping out of medieval darkness, able to handle challenges and get it figured out himself. When you look into the eyes of David, I think you're looking into the eyes of Renaissance man. And he's sizing up the sort of bully of medieval darkness, and he's going to handle it. And when you look at David's hand, his hand that powers the sling is way bigger and more developed than it should be, because that's symbolic of God's hand that powered David to slay that giant. An apt mascot for the town of Florence that thought of itself as more God-blessed and better and more capable than its competing neighboring city-states, you see. So it's important to psychoanalyze this kind of stuff and try to understand it. Otherwise, the museum becomes obligatory drudgery. You can get turned on by the art if you have the right attitude. Florence, I love late at night. I love to wander around Florence late at night, and the city has this great new system of giving top-notch street artists license to perform in great spots at 11 o'clock or midnight. So if you're out and about then, there's none of the crowds, it's cool, and there's, it's just a mellow atmosphere with nice street music. Gelato, Florence is the capital of great ice cream. You want to remember that. You got these incredible lines of different flavors that you'll want to check out. A couple hours away, you got Pisa. And Pisa is famous for its tipsy tower. But I'll remind you, there's lots more to Pisa than just the Leaning Tower, and that's important for you to understand. It was a cultural center, a rival of Florence in its day. You got the great cathedral and the baptistry, but most people are excited about this. Okay, well, it's not tilting this much yet, but they're worried that it keeps tilting. They found a way to straighten it up, and it's not with clever tour groups. It's with counterweights and pulling out the moisture from the uphill side and so on, but they're working feverishly to keep that thing from tilting further, and they've sort of stopped it now, and it's open again so tourists can go to the top of the actual Leaning Tower. It's quite an interesting experience. Okay, something Americans love are the hill towns of Tuscany and Umbria, these romantic hill towns. And the characteristic thing about the hill towns is they have all of these towers. In the old days, Romeo and Juliet time, you had the Montagues and the Capulets. Remember fighting each other? Nobles in the same city fighting each other because they're in different sort of feuds, whatever the story was. Each of them had their own protective towers. When a king comes in, and the whole historic struggle between nobles and kings was sort of a power squabble. Nobles didn't want strong kings. Kings assert themselves, and the first thing they want to do is say, all nobles have to top off your towers. So you had towns all over Italy full of towers. King comes in, no more towers. For some reason, the one town that survived that king's initiative to take down the towers from the nobles that threatened his power was San Gimignano. Consequently, San Gimignano is so famous today for the tourists because it's got all of these great towers. And it's a fun place to check out, San Gimignano. The ultimate hill town, as far as I'm concerned, is Siena. I love Siena. It's sort of a Gothic Venice without the canals in a certain way. There's just something charming and magical about Siena. A lot of aficionados of Italy, I think, have a certain soft spot for Siena. It's easy to get there from Florence, a 1-hour bus ride away. Don't be really hung up on trains too much. Use the buses occasionally. It can be much smarter, like going from Florence to Siena. Here we have the main square in Siena with the City Hall Tower instead of a church spire. Exclamation point for this humanism that we were talking about, as the people of Siena were able to run their city-state in a way they were very proud of. Here's that main square. This is the square that's so famous for the Palio, that wild horse race. You go there most of the day and it's just like this. And then all of a sudden you come back later in the afternoon and it's like this. Whoa, what's going on? There's always something going on in Siena, and generally it's relating to that Palio, that medieval horse race. Twice a year, I believe, they have this Palio, and there's festivals leading up to it and afterwards. So you'll see lots of color, lots of celebrations, lots of banners, and then you can get out farther away from that town center and see what was so important about the town centuries ago. The Church of Siena is typical Italian Gothic, not as tall as the Gothic churches in Florence, but making up for its lack of grandeur and height by a more ornate facade like you see here. This church is just packed with great art, and when you look at Sienese art, it's more medieval at the same time as Botticelli and Michelangelo. They would still have gold leaf backgrounds and halos. Because they embraced their Gothic ways rather than Florence, which embraced the Renaissance ways. Another wonderful town in the area is Assisi, and Assisi is famous for the town as the home of St. Francis, who's buried here in the great Basilica of Assisi. St. Francis was famous for his austerity and the poverty and the purity of that monastic life. A lot of people think, well, this is sort of a contradiction to have a lavish church to remember him, but it's a great teaching center, and I think they make a good case that this is a great opportunity to celebrate the teachings of St. Francis. It's critical when you go to Assisi, if you want to really experience it, to get into sort of a Franciscan state of mind if you can, buy a little book about the life and writing of St. Francis, walk up above the town, and just try to get into the spirit. There's something really spiritual about Assisi that's hard to put your finger on, and it's understandable when you go there that this is the place that when they have multi-faith get-togethers and ecumenical sort of get-togethers, Assisi seems like the appropriate place. You just gotta love the teaching of St. Francis. So climb up to the ruined castle above that town, have a picnic, and listen to the same birds that inspired St. Francis so long ago. This is the Basilica of St. Francis right here, damaged by that horrible earthquake a few years ago. Today they've patched it up and it's strong and stable again, and the tourists are comfortable packing in there with all the pilgrims. When you go to Assisi, again, there's a lot of interesting St. Francis sites to see. Perhaps the most interesting is down in the valley floor, where the little fixer-upper church that he and his friends made, and the church authorities gave them permission to make that their center, and they fixed up the church. That was where they established the Franciscan order. Today that church is encrusted with worship aids, and a huge church is built around it. And that's high on the pilgrimage list for all the people that come to Assisi to see the St. Francis sites. Here we have a classic hill town. You can see this volcanic plug here, providing a natural fortification. This town is called Orvieto, filling the hilltop created by that sort of tufa plug. And this was a refuge of the Pope in the Middle Ages. There we have the great church of Orvieto. Orvieto is a wonderful town to check out. I really enjoyed doing my research there. And an hour away, you've got my favorite hill town, which happens to be just over the border in the next state of Lazio. That's why nobody goes there. It's in a state that doesn't promote tourism to hill towns because it doesn't have many great ones. And everybody goes to Umbria and Tuscany for their hill towns. Orvieto, which is just over the border, obviously wouldn't promote a town in the next state. Consequently, this is the best hill town by my estimate, and it's got the least crowds. Civita di Bagnoregio goes back to 500 BC. Today there's just a few people still living there. You got this old donkey path, and it's the haunt of big city people that go there for a break from the urban sort of scramble. You still got a little bit of the old traditional life there. These are pillars from the Etruscan church that stood on that same spot before there was a Christian church, 5 centuries BC. All over Europe. Remember, if you dig under that church, you'll find, you know, maybe a mosque or an earlier church or a pagan temple, and even below that, something that was important to the people that lived there before them. These are the last 2 residents of Civita di Bagnoregio. The last of the I've been there, going there for 20 years, and I've seen the population go from 100 to 2. And it's I gotta be honest, it's really not a town anymore. It's a shell with the big city cousins of the people who are gone now, who come in on the weekends and make bruschetta for visiting tourists and so on. Still, it's a charming place. There's something about Civita that really is magical to me. Towns all over this part of Italy, if you can get away from the tourist, you can step into the laundromat and have a conversation with a woman you will never forget. You won't have an in-depth conversation, but you can throw back and forth a few words and connect with somebody who is part of the traditional scene. All over Italy, you'll find high prices for even ramshackle little hotels because the demand is just so high. I work very hard to find hotels that are a good value. I like a hotel with about 20 rooms. And here you've got the typical sort of system. There are B&Bs in Italy that are quite inexpensive. This is Mama Rabati, who rents 6 rooms in her home for $80 a night for a double, and that's a very good value in Florence. Wherever you're going in Italy, you want to pay enough to have a centrally located and quiet place just to get a little siesta halfway through a grueling day of sightseeing. That's very important. It behooves you to be a low-maintenance guest so that your hotelier will like you and will help you out. You see what I mean? Things go better when you're a delight to have in the hotel or at the restaurant. I find there's 2 kinds of travelers. Some travel with a clenched fist, and they gotta have this, and they're gonna send a letter to me and complain. And other people go to the same place, and they have a great time, and they send Christmas cards to the guy. All right? It's just, a lot is created by your approach to it all. But I like to ask people to do me favors, and you should too. If you're a good guest, he'll get on the phone and talk to the next person to make sure they've got the reservation straight, or find out what about the strike, or can you get a bus ticket, and so on. Italy is hot, and I'm talking temperature, okay? Italy is just, I swear, it's getting hotter over there. I prided myself in never needing air conditioning, and then I couldn't sleep one night in Italy, and I just had to move my whole family to another hotel the next day. It's just getting hot over there, and you gotta have air conditioning when you get a heat streak in July and August. And it's just, there's air conditioning everywhere now there, and you gotta have to get those remotes and figure them out. If you go in the summer, you'll want to know how to use the air conditioning remotes, and you pay extra for them in a lot of cases. This is Signor Fortunato, and he runs a classy restaurant in Rome. This is where Bill Clinton goes, and Margaret Thatcher, and anybody who's famous in Rome goes to this guy. He's 200 yards in front of the Pantheon. I just was there 2 weeks ago with my family. Remarkably reasonable price. Classy, elegant service. I'm saying you're going to pay $15 for a bowl of spaghetti at a simple restaurant, and $20 here. I guess my point is, order low on the menu and enjoy some of these fancy restaurants, and you'll have a very classy experience without going broke. Typically when you're in Italy, you want to have family style in the restaurant. You order a lot of things and you pass it around. I stay away from the secondi, frankly. I like the primi piatti and the antipasti, the appetizers and the first course. And you do it in a family kind of way. I was just with 12 kids, friends of my son's in their foreign study program. I took them out to pizza, and there happened to be 12 of us, and there's 12 different pizzas. And I said, let's just have one of each pizza, bring them out one at a time, sliced in 12 pieces. And it was just a great way to literally eat our way through the menu for $8 each. So, you can do that kind of fun with the Italian food, and Italians are really cool with creative, fun approaches to their food. One dessert for 4 people, that's no problem. Just get in good with the waiter, have fun, and enjoy what they're cooking. Here we have a family-style spaghetti feast. But here we have my kind of menu when I'm in Italy. One language, small, and handwritten. That means they don't buy a lot of food because they want to serve it all today and buy fresh food tomorrow, and people will put up with less of a selection. It is handwritten every day because it's determined by what's fresh in the market, and it's in one language because they really cater to the local people. Tourists are more than welcome. But here we have 10 euros for your pasta lunch, and that would be $15. A glass of house wine, and you're out of there for under $20. That's what it's going to cost in a funky, very popular, top-end community neighborhood restaurant. Your pasta, your minestrone, your carafe of house wine, and your tap water instead of bottled water, that's the cheap way to eat in Italy if you go to a restaurant. As soon as you go in the secondi, it's going to bump it way up. It's going to double the cost of your meal. And everything but the most top-end restaurants are happy with you ordering antipasti and primi piattis. One of my favorite budget tricks, like I like a salad bar here, is an antipasto bar in Italy. And you got these wonderful spreads of all the antipasti, and it's $15 for a plate, and you go and you fill out whatever you want. Lots of seafood and different kinds of meat, and of course all of the cooked vegetables. It's gone. Don't let anybody tell you you can't afford Europe. It's no more expensive than the United States. We're not as wealthy as we like to think we are. We just got to order more carefully. Italians love their ingredients. That's the big deal. You need, and you can go to the rosticceria and have restaurant food to go, which I think is a wonderful opportunity to have quality cooking, local traditions, and takeaway prices. This is the equivalent of a local Subway sandwich shop, and these people line up every day, and these guys are making great sandwiches for local workers. If there's a long line of people at lunch, you know it's a good deal. I mean, that's just kind of obvious. Here we have a rosticceria, lunch for two, it'd be $30 now, but you get all this kind of takeaway food when you go to a rosticceria. If you get away from the tourist, you get a cup of coffee for $1 instead of $2. And if you go to the marketplace, you buy your produce, very tasty produce, for essentially the same cost you'd pay here. So, you know, picnicking is the way to go if you're with your family on a budget in Italy these days. Now, Italians love their wine, and you can get quality wine or you can just fill it up cheap. There's actually literally filling stations where people bring their jugs, and it costs €1 a liter, okay? So that'd be $6 a gallon for your wine. Rome. History's great success story, the Roman Empire, you know, and when you go there, you're going to walk through the rubble of Rome, and you need to put that rubble together. It's important when you go to the Forum to piece it together and understand this was the sacred way, the main street of ancient Rome on that common grounds where they had the 7 hills of Rome. And then look at the rubble and look at the buildings and understand how magnificent they must have been. 2,000 years ago, the Basilica Maxentius, these were side niches in this building. That's a nub of an arch that would have gone all the way over that vacant lot today, the size of a football field. Furnish it with marble veneer, put fancy people in togas and fountains, and you get a little sense of what Rome was like 2,000 years ago. It's hard to imagine that, but when you have a guide and you can sit on the rubble of ancient Rome, put it back together, it makes a lot of sense. Try to get a guide, try to use your guidebook, download those audio tours. When you go to the sites of ancient Rome, remember, there's a lot of lines, and a lot of it is avoidable if you know how to get in. This is the Colosseum, built 2,000 years ago to house 50,000 people. They could bring flags or sails over the top to give people shade. They could flood it and wage mock naval battles. There's a long line here. That's not a line to get into the Colosseum. That's a line to buy a ticket to get into the Colosseum. You see, there's other ways to get tickets, and you can walk right by those people rather than baking in the sun for an hour. 100 yards away is the entrance to the Palatine Hill. When you buy a ticket to the Colosseum, it includes the Palatine Hill. You don't have a choice. Nobody's going to the Palatine Hill. Everybody's going to the Colosseum. Walk over to the Palatine Hill, buy the ticket there. There's never a line, and then go over and see the Colosseum. You just saved an hour. One of my favorite, I mean, people really appreciate that tip. When I'm in Rome, everybody's thanking me for that one. Well, you need to be a smart tourist so you can not waste time in lines. You get into the Colosseum, there's a little bit of it reconstructed so you can imagine what it was like when it was arena. Arena was the Latin word for sand. They scattered sand on that. And underneath you can see where the gladiators were. There was a tunnel that actually went straight to the gladiators' dormitory a couple hundred yards away. A little walk from there, you've got the Pantheon, the building that gives you a feeling for the magnificence and the splendor of Rome at its zenith. Wow, the Pantheon, I love going inside because this is the one building that was used straight through, never cannibalized. It went from being a temple to all the gods to being a church dedicated to the martyrs. And when you look up to the top, I just shot this a couple weeks ago, it's been newly restored, magnificent after dark with that big skylight in the top. I want to warn you, 10% of all the stuff you waited all your life to see, you finally get there, and there it is, covered with scaffolding. Just remember, that's an ongoing struggle for Europe. It's expensive to get into the sites because there's so much pollution. They've always got to be fixing stuff up. There's a lot of scaffolding, and then it finally gets done, and it was worth the wait. All the stuff is looking good today because it used to be scaffolded, and we're paying steep admission prices because we're covering the cost of that. One of the great new sites in Rome is the Altar of Peace. And this was the altar that they dedicated in this only modern building in downtown Rome. Here was our altar they made to kick off the Pax Romana. Now we've conquered everybody, there can be peace, all right? And this is the beginning of that great 200-year stretch. The Capitol Hill has for centuries been the center of the city government, and today you walk up those steps designed by Michelangelo. You got the City Hall and two great museums side by side. giving you a lot of great art from the, well, this is the Etruscan sea wolf going back to 500 BC. Imagine that was carved out or cast 500 years before Christ. And this is the mythological founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus. Or Romulus and Remus, I can never keep track of it. But you got them scooted in there in Baroque age, okay? But the Etruscan she-wolf is really a masterpiece from those days, 500 years BC. This is the altar of the modern nation, Italy, created in 1870, and this is Victor Emmanuel, the first king of Italy. Sort of a monstrosity according to a lot of people's artistic sensitivities, but still look at it as Italy trying to establish itself as it joined the League of European Nations a little bit late. And it was tough for Germany and Italy to muscle their way into it. Consequently, you had a big war right after that where Italy and Germany were against everybody else. It's interesting to tie that together. Today, you can enjoy this big monument from below, or you can actually go to the very, very top. A brand new opportunity. This is from midway up. And then from the very top, they just opened up this elevator, and you pay €7, that's $10, and here you get this commanding view of Italy from the top. Don't neglect the indoor sites of Rome because the outdoor sites are so great. Make a point to get into the museums and check out the art and look into the eyes of these statues and read the history of Rome. Here we have an emperor, this little boy, ruling during a 50-year period when 18 emperors were assassinated during the fall of Rome. He does not look like the picture of confidence. He just wonders who's going to kill me and when's it going to happen. And his advisors don't look very stable either. Everybody is nervous because Rome is falling. The most exquisite building interior in all of Europe, I would say, is the Borghese Gallery. You've got to have an appointment to get here, but this is an incredible palace in the Villa Borghese, the Borghese Gardens, where you've got the great Bernini statues. Most importantly, Apollo chasing Daphne. Bernini was the father of Baroque movement, and he did most of his great work, I think, in Rome. And when you go around Rome, the fountains, the St. Peter's Square, and the great statues by Bernini there established the Baroque age that followed the Renaissance. Here we have this great exciting moment when Apollo is chasing Daphne. And in good Baroque style, they capture an exciting moment. And according to the myth, you know, Apollo's all excited, and Daphne, just when she is going to be jumped on, she sprouts leaves and roots are coming from her toes, and she's turning into a tree. And Apollo is in for one rude surprise, right? Now, Bernini captures that exciting Baroque moment right there before Apollo has all that bark rash, okay? All over Rome, you've got great churches hiding great pieces of art. If you know where to look, you can find Michelangelo's Moses in Chains, or you can find this or that Caravaggio masterpiece or whatever. And if you know where to look, you can find some odd, quirky sites, like the Capuchin Monastery with all of these great skeletons. The Capuchin monks had an interesting habit of hanging their dead brothers up to dry in their crypt. Just a reminder to all of us, according to them, that enjoy your vacation, but in a very short period of time, you'll be just like us. That's what they're saying. And it's a very, very interesting place and a fun postcard to pick up when you go to the Capuchin Monastery in Rome. Tu es Petrus, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. That's the whole reason for the primacy of Rome in the Catholic Church. And when you go to Rome, you're going to find a lot of this bushy guy with the keys. That's St. Peter, the first pope, right? And he is buried immediately under that dome. And he was crucified during a chariot race game. Conceivably, he could have seen this obelisk, which marked the chariot race course. After he was crucified, his followers took him after the event to a humble little graveyard here on what was called the Vatican Hill, and he was buried there. And for a couple of centuries, Christians were worshipped quietly after dark on the tomb of St. Peter. In 312, Constantine the emperor became a Christian, and overnight Christianity becomes the legal religion, and Constantine has a huge church built right on the grave of St. Peter. And in Michelangelo's age, they built a more modern church with Michelangelo's great dome. But when you go to the Vatican, you just got to understand the reason for it all and the heritage there. It's great in the winter to go to Rome. I've spent many winters in Rome for a week. I love a week in a big city in Europe in the winter. From the top of that dome, you can look down on the Vatican grounds, the smallest country in Europe. You can look down on St. Peter's Square and that obelisk I mentioned and see the modern boulevard that Mussolini blasted out of a tangled medieval quarter to give people a more dramatic approach to the great church. And you step into that church and wow. Now I'll tell you, if you're not a Catholic, become one as you enter, okay? For years I went there, and there is a good sword-carrying Protestant. I was just really disgusted at all that wealth and everything, as you can imagine. Park your sword at the door, okay, and go in there and enjoy it on its terms. This is the greatest church in Christendom, and it accomplishes nothing to go in there and have a bad attitude about it. It's a glorious building, built 500 years ago. Now you can take a flash photograph of Michelangelo's Pieta, or you can go to Mass any day of the week at 5 o'clock, right there at the front altar. Two different ways to experience this incredible space. Get wowed when you are at St. Peter's Basilica. Michelangelo's masterpiece, the Pieta, is in the St. Peter's Basilica. Long lines to get up to the dome, but it's worth it for that most glorious dome ascent in Europe. If you want to see the Pope, it's quite straightforward and easy to do. He makes routine appearances, and the square is just filled with people. And you just got to ask locally, when is the Pope going to make an appearance? From the top of the dome, you can look down at the Vatican Museum, this long, big building packed with art. 1,500 years of papal art collecting in there, and you got to walk literally all the way around the country to come in on that side. And then this is just a huge museum, and everybody wants to get here. This is the Sistine Chapel, and it's worth the trek. Glorious hallways, incredible art that inspired the great artists of the Renaissance. The greatest classical statuary you're going to see, I think, in Italy is in the Vatican Museum, and a great Etruscan collection. And then, this is one of our guides, Brad, taking our groups through. The art should be fun. You need good information to make the art fun in a big museum like this. And then the culmination is the Sistine Chapel. Of course, by Michelangelo. Michelangelo did the ceiling during the High Renaissance, and then later on, during the Counter-Reformation period, he did the Last Judgment. Here we have a very positive, uplifting kind of scene with the creation, God creating Adam, the whole story of Genesis up here. Much later we have Judgment Day, and Jesus is coming down with his fist clenched and Mary cowering. And it's just quite an interesting thing to psychoanalyze this. Here we see on Creation Day, God creating Adam, and look at what an impressive character Adam is. This is that humanism I was talking about, the celebration of man in the Renaissance. Much later, we look at the Judgment Day, and here's Jesus, fist up in the air, people going to hell, people going to heaven. Mary getting out of the way now, she can't help us. And it's just, this is that kind of counter-Reformation propaganda art after the Reformation was kicked off. And Rome had just been plundered by the Catholic army of Spain, and the church was coming out there defending itself with this powerful art. Understand the purpose of the art when you're traveling. It's very important. When you go to Rome, there's different kinds of tourism, and there's a whole overlay of pilgrims Rome. Countless pilgrims come to Rome, and they've got their checklist of very important things for them to see, and they will be climbing the holy steps on their knees and so on. Check that out. It's quite a fascinating slice of the whole Roman experience. Also, I thoroughly enjoy each evening when the police shut down the main boulevard and we have everybody out making the scene. That's that passeggiata that I was talking about. Rome, you can connect all the night spots very easily for your evening walk. Of course, you got the Trevi Fountain. One of my favorite places is Campo di Fiori, with the heretic who was burned, Bruno, and symbolic of the independence of that part of Rome around Campo di Fiori. It's a great, colorful district, great for restaurants. Of course, you got Piazza Navona, good place to spend too much for a cup of coffee and make it a good value by enjoying the view. Outside of Rome, you've got Mussolini's planned suburb, EUR. Mussolini had a chance to give his architectural imprint on his country more constructively anyways than Hitler, because Mussolini ruled in peacetime, and he was able to build all this fascist kind of architecture. Here you see what fascism is all about in architecture and in statuary. No questions asked. This is super patriotic, monolithic. Everybody's with us. We're going to all be strong together. Just don't ask any questions. Follow me. It's that kind of message that the art gave during the Mussolini period. Rome could not have established its great empire without great roads. And you got wonderful roads from the Roman Empire that you can still check out. The Via Appia is the most easy to visit part of the road. And out there, you've got the catacombs, the actual catacombs where there's a lot of popes buried. Inside from Rome, or inland from Rome, you can go to the Tivoli Gardens, Villa d'Este, and near that is Hadrian's Villa. Hadrian was a great traveler, and he loved to build his favorite buildings, replicas of them, in his villa outside of Rome. So you go to Hadrian's Villa today, and you can see all these beautiful ruins of places that Hadrian built to remind him of where he traveled. Perhaps the most underrated site in all of Italy is the ancient seaport of Rome called Ostia Antica. Ostia Antica was the thriving port of Rome 2,000 years ago with 60,000 people. It was abandoned. I think malaria came and messed up the whole situation, and over the centuries, filled it up. Forgotten, today excavated, giving us a look that rivals Pompeii at what ancient Rome was all about. And this was it's just a half an hour away from downtown Rome, whereas Pompeii is 2.5 or 3.5 hours south of Rome by train. If you can't get to Pompeii but you wish you could, go to Ostia. If you like Italy as far south as Rome, go further south because it gets better. If Italy's getting on your nerves by the time you get to Rome, don't go further south because it gets worse. Italy intensifies as you plunge deeper, all right? Boy, if you go to Naples, it's a barrel full of cultural monkeys. I just think it's like an urban jungle. I love Naples. I'm adamant about having my groups go to Naples. You don't want to spend the night there probably, but check it out for a day, and then you sleep in Sorrento nearby. Naples, in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, is this intense city where you've got the birthplace of pizza, wonderful pizza, people living out in the streets. Again, all this strolling action, wonderful marketplaces, colorful flea markets, people living in vertical neighborhoods, showering you with scraps of paper. They want to be your pen pal, proudly holding up their chickens. I found Mr. Magoo living peacefully in his retirement there. And again, from there you go an hour south, you can go up to the top of Mount Vesuvius, you can visit Pompeii, and you can go to Sorrento. Here is Mount Vesuvius before it blew, kind of like Mount St. Helens before it blew. And this is on the walls of Pompeii. You go up to the top of Mount Vesuvius, you can look into that crater, it's hot, it's still steaming. And then you go to Pompeii. Stopped in its tracks with the eruption of Mount Vesuvius 79 years after Christ, today giving us that incredible intimate look at what Rome was like 2,000 years ago. Wander through the town with a good guide, enjoy the frescoes, and remember the most important art of Pompeii is actually in Naples in the National Museum there. Do not go to Pompeii without going also to the great museum in Naples where you'll find the great statues and incredibly exquisite mosaics on the walls of that museum. Now, again, you don't want to hang out in Naples, you want to go down to Sorrento. This is Limoncello town, okay? This is this gorgeous, dreamy, beautiful plush resort, and it's the gateway to so much Amalfi Coast fun. I can hardly wait to get to Sorrento again in my research work. From there you go down this treacherously beautiful Amalfi Coast, enjoying towns like Positano. Simon and Carl and I had a great time filming on the Amalfi Coast. You can see that in our show. I love to hire Raphael or Carmelo, his father, for a day in the taxi. It's really worth having a taxi that functions as a driver for you on the Amalfi Coast. There are cases when it's worth hiring a car, by the way. From there you can take a boat out to Capri. And that's the resort island. It's been a resort getaway ever since Roman emperor times. You can go to the top of the mountain there. Most people are interested in the Blue Grotto. It's kind of a tourist racket, but I got to say it's a lot of fun. You go out there on a big boat, and then you hop into a little boat, and you pay these ruffians to take you inside. You all line up. There's a chain, a little tiny hole, and the slop is going like this. And at the bottom of a wave, the guy pulls the chain, and you go through the mouth of the hole. Everybody is nervous they're going to get squashed against the rocks. And then, boom, you're in this Blue Grotto. And it really is a magical, romantic sort of thing to check out. And then you got to bribe the guy to take you back out. Remember, 500 years before Christ, southern Italy was called Magna Graecia, Greater Greece. There are wonderful Greek ruins in southern Italy. And I question the sanity of traveling all the way to Italy if all you want to see is Greek ruins, when you remember some of the best ruins in the Greek world are south of Naples at Paestum. And if you want to do more of that, go all the way down to Sicily. You can find Agrigento and the wonderful Greek temple at Taormina. Sicily is Italy in the extreme. And you've got my favorite town in Sicily called Cefalù. Cefalù, a great place to hang out, colorful, rustic. Palermo is a little whiff of Africa. Remember, Sicily is where Africa and the Middle East and the Normans and Italy all come together. And you got this interesting mix of cultures. And more Capuchin monasteries with their dead brothers drying on the walls. Dramatic interior. And all that is covered, as you know, in all the different guidebooks and the maps and the phrase book and the DVD. I hope you've enjoyed this look at Italy, and I wish you happy travels. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks. Buon viaggio. Thank you.